Welcome back to All Things Creepy. I'm your host, Micah James, and this week I am talking about cartoon theories. Now, a few things before we hop into this episode in detail. First and foremost, this is going to be a shorter episode, most likely less than 15 minutes, but definitely more than 5 for sure. But I just wanted a little bit of a jumping off point because I have been going down a big rabbit hole on TikTok and YouTube and Reddit about TV show and movie theories, and it's kind of just been consuming me, and I wanted to talk about some of them. And if you guys have any ideas, again, it doesn't have to be cartoon related, just TV show, at the very least TV show related, and I'll include it in a part 2. And the second thing is, these are simply theories, or kind of like, I guess to a certain extent you could say headcanons that people thought of in relation to different cartoons. And I don't necessarily buy into all of them. I just think it's fun to talk about. So even though this is going to be a shorter episode, let's dive into some cartoon theories. So the first one has to do with Winnie the Pooh and mental illness. This theory states that each resident of the 100 Acre Woods and Christopher Robin has some type of mental illness. The most common example that people point to is Eeyore, who seemingly has depression. Another common one people point to that I can definitely see and almost kind of agree with is Piglet with some kind of anxiety disorder. And this one makes sense to me because he's always really nervous and he's just really afraid of the unknown. So I can kind of buy into it to a certain extent for sure. The others, very highly up for debate, and I don't completely buy into it. So there are 2 other examples that I'm going to talk about, but there are definitely more. But one is that Pooh loves eating honey so much throughout the day that one might argue that he has an eating disorder. And Tigger has ADHD as he is constantly on the move. And each character is like kind of assigned their own mental illness, I guess you could say. And some even take it further and say that like each character of the 100 Acre Wood is one part of Christopher Robin's kind of like mental illness and how he's kind of like processing it. But again, I don't know how much I buy into that part or a lot of these, save for like Piglet and Eeyore, really. Theories 2 and 3 are similar to a certain extent, so I guess you could say it's theory 2 and 2.5. But the first one I'm going to talk about is how the Flintstones take place in the future. Now, the proof for this is the fact that despite living in the Stone Age, they seem to have TVs, drive-in movies, restaurants, and many other things that didn't even exist during the caveman times, never mind the dinosaur times. And basically, the world ended, but they had just enough tech from before the end of the world that they were able to somehow make it work with, Stone Age technology or lack thereof, and, modern technology. Now, theory 3/2.5, depending on how you're looking at it, also has to do with the Flintstones and it being a post-apocalyptic world. And it's how the Flintstones and the Jetsons coexist. Again, this one kind of piggybacks off of the previous one. So basically, the Flintstones is the side of the lower to middle class people who are unable to leave Earth before the end of the world and now live, like I said, essentially in the Stone Age, but with like modern technology as well. But on the other hand, the Jetsons focuses on the upper class people who are able to make it out in time and live relatively peaceful lives above the destroyed Earth. And I can almost see this one, how like people come to this conclusion, because if I remember correctly, there was a crossover episode with the Flintstones and the Jetsons. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I didn't fully look into that part before recording this episode. But there was, I just have a distinct memory of some sort of crossover between the Flintstones and the Jetsons. So like I said, I totally see how this theory came about. Now, the next one I'm talking about is how Scooby-Doo might be taking place in an economic recession or depression. So this is more in regards to the original cartoon rather than any of the reboots or the live action or anything like that. This is another one where it does kind of make sense to me. Everything seems to look run down and dilapidated, and many of the quote-unquote monsters are professors, celebrities, or other successful people who turn to crime. Perhaps it was because they needed the money. This would also explain why the gang isn't in school, it's closed, and why they wear the same thing every day, little to no money. Now, some people will even extend this theory further and say that the gang are draft dodgers. And again, this kind of circles back to how it explains that why they're not in school and why they're wearing the same thing every day. They're just trying to not get caught and be sent to Vietnam and stuff like that. But that part, I'm not entirely sure how much I believe. I definitely can see the whole economic recession side of it for sure. Number 5 that I'm talking about today has to do with the apocalypse, and that is how Aladdin takes place in a post-apocalyptic world. Now, the proof for this one is how Genie, the character of Genie, always has these pop culture references, as well as he also talks about the casino, things that would not have existed historically in the time of Aladdin. Now, this part is debunked by some people because some say it was just for a comedic effect. Now, to extend on this theory, some point out that the titular character, Aladdin, wears a fez, which wasn't invented until the 19th century, which, again, the time that Aladdin is supposed to be set, it doesn't make sense historically. However, again, to debunk this side of it, it could have just been a goof. The creators of Aladdin could have just not realized that the invention of the fez has been more recent than when Aladdin was supposed to take place. Number 6 is another one that's kind of far-fetched for me, but it does seem to be one of the more popular ones that I kept seeing, and it's how Charlie Brown had cancer. This would potentially explain his bald head and why he seems to go through so much turmoil in his young life. This theory also says that many of the stories that happen in the Peanuts world happen in Charlie's dream. The evidence for this is the fact that a lot of the adults are all absent from these stories. I mean, that part kind of makes sense as far as Charlie dreaming up all of these things, because I feel like a lot of children, myself included, have thought about a world without adults. So again, that part of the theory definitely makes sense to me. Number 7, it wouldn't be a cartoon theory episode if I didn't at least touch upon this one, the Rugrats theory. Angelica imagined all of the Rugrats. The only other kids that are quote-unquote real and not in her head are Susie and Tommy's younger brother, Dill. Everyone else, just in her head. Now, this is the one that kind of triggered my interest in lost episodes and just conspiracy theories surrounding cartoons. But it does go into more detail. I will try to link the original story in the show notes. It does further explain how this could be all in Angelica's head, but then it's hard for me to believe, because then how are the adults always acknowledging the children as well if they weren't real, right? But I mean, again, it's one of those theories where it's fun to talk about. Number 8 is another famous one, I think, and it's Ed, Edd and Eddy taking place in Purgatory. If you've seen this show, I do have a question for you. Have you noticed how the kids never left the cul-de-sac? the parents were never around and it's always summer or at least close to it. In my memory, I think there was only 1 or 2 episodes where they were in school. I could be wrong though, but for the most part, it seems like they never left the cul-de-sac. And that's kind of the evidence that people use to say that the kids are actually all dead and are living in purgatory. Let me give you some examples. Ralph was an immigrant child from the early 1900s who might have died from some outbreak during that time. So like the influenza outbreak, perhaps tuberculosis, that kind of thing. Johnny and Plank died in a lumber accident. Now, I've seen a few different theories with Johnny and Plank about how like Plank was a friend of Johnny and Plank was just a nickname, and Johnny died but Plank was saved, and so like the piece of wood that Johnny carries around is kind of just a comfort item and reminds him of his old best friend kind of thing. I could go on, but I have 2 more theories I want to cover before the end of this episode, so we're gonna move on to the next one. So Dexter's laboratory was actually government testing. So let's start by talking about some obvious things about this show, or at least low-key obvious things about this show that don't quite make sense. So first of all, Dexter has this full-blown lab in his parents' house, and you have to assume that this takes up a lot of electricity. So how are his parents so unaware of this? And assuming that Dexter built this lab himself, where did he get this money to build it? Unless his parents do know and they just don't care. Dee Dee, his older sister, also seems to easily get in almost daily despite this lab being a secret. Because she's always in there, why hasn't she told her parents? You would think that it would have slipped by now. These are just some things to think about when you also consider that this may all be an experiment. The whole reason Dexter has regular access to the lab isn't because he's a genius. He was just the only one to figure out what was happening. Dee Dee is the control variable. The government just wanted to test how well Dexter adapted to distractions. The whole show is also orchestrated by a government facility to raise kids to be scientists. The other known kid scientist in this show is Poindexter, and some people do point about they seem to be the 2 main kid scientists in the show, that it just further quote unquote proves this theory. And finally, there is a few Phineas and Ferb theories that I do want to touch on. So the first one has been more or less debunked by Dan Povenmire, who plays Dr. Doofenshmirtz. I'm pretty sure he's debunked it on TikTok, but this theory states that Candace and Phineas's real father is Doofenshmirtz himself. The evidence for this is that Phineas has a uniquely shaped head while his hair sprouts from the top. As far as Candace, she slouches, has a long neck, and is lactose intolerant. Doofenshmirtz also has a uniquely shaped head, hair sprouting from the top of his head, a slouch, and a long neck, and to top it all off is lactose intolerant. However, to be fair, a lot of people slouch and happen to be lactose intolerant. Another theory states that all of these things that Phineas and Ferb do during the summer are all in Candace's head, to a certain extent. Some say that Phineas and Ferb did build a roller coaster, but it wasn't on the scale that Candace thought. They didn't really bring a beach into their backyard. They just had a sandbox and filled it with a bunch of water to make it look like a beach, and Candace just blew it up. And that's why Phineas and Ferb were never caught when Candace was trying to bust them. Okay, so that is all the theories I have for today. Again, I do plan on trying to do a part 2. If there are any other theories about shows, they don't have to be specific to cartoons, like I said. If there are any other theories that I did not cover in this episode, hit me up with more so I can make a part 2. And they don't even have to be TV shows. It could be movies too. Hit me up with those theories and any other topics you would want me to cover, and I will definitely add it to my topic lists. So, with all that being said, happy Pride Month and be safe out there, guys.